Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Arkhaven Comics. No, let me retract that. Dark Legion Comics. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I'm in a good mood because of some news that I'll share with you in a little bit here. But first of all, I want to address some statements that were made about yours truly by a massively insignificant figure in the comics industry. A guy who works with his pencil and has a surprisingly large following on YouTube. And of course, I'm talking about none other than the author of Cyberfrog, Ethan van Sciver. Now, Ethan made some comments about me in a recent YouTube hangout or something or other that were brought to my attention. And so, I checked it out. And I have to say, I have to take issue, I have to take exception to a few things that he said. For example, he said that I am arrogant. Now, all right, that's probably true. He also said that I claimed that I was going to be bigger and more significant in the comic industry in a year. And that is also true. Now, I have to admit that he has a point. I think I would be a lot closer to achieving that goal had he not had the courage to go out on his own and launch his own Cyberfrog comic. He's not still working within the aegis of DC. He's now out there in the wilds of the independents, the crowdsourcing, just like us. And, Cyberfrog has been massively successful. Cyberfrog broke the record that Alt Hero set for a crowdfunded new comic. I mean, we could get technical, and say, well, Cyberfrog is really bringing something back. It's not truly new, but let's not be pedantic. Cyberfrog is definitely the largest independent crowdfunded new comic. It has set the new standard. It has set the objective that some people are going to attempt to break at some point in time. I'll name no names, but we've got something. We've got something planned, right? But I also have to mention a few other things. There was a guy on Twitter who was running around saying that Ethan and I are working together. That's not true. That's absolutely false. I would like to work with Ethan someday. He mentioned that. And, I think that there's a possibility of that at some point. There are other great artists, really good illustrators, really good colorists that we expect to eventually work with, either at Arkhaven or through Dark Legion. And so, this is the success of Cyberfrog may end up delaying that day. But I want to point out that I still have another 6 months or so. We're barely into July. I have until early January to become more significant than Ethan van Sciver in the industry. So I think that we've taken some big steps in that regard. if you think about it, when I first made those comments, we had not published a single comic. We have now published multiple Amazon bestsellers. We've already very nearly sold out of our first gold logo editions. And we have already signed a deal with a movie producer. And so now these are early days yet, and we'll see what happens. But we need to do more if I'm going to back up those extremely arrogant words. And that's fair. It is absolutely fair for Ethan van Sciver to remind me of that gauntlet that I threw down. And I'm not yet willing to retract those words, nor will I until it gets to the point where it's just simply not true within that time frame. I mean, let's face it, I am going to pass him up eventually. It's going to happen. I'm looking forward to hearing how completely twisted and how completely folded, spindled, and mutilated my message is going to be. By the time it gets back to Ethan, it's going to be, Fox is devoting an entire issue to nothing but having superheroes stomp on frogs. You realize now that this is going to become a thing. Some of you know me quite well. Some of you YouTube subscribers don't. But, you can probably guess that, there's not ever going to be a restaurant scene set in France where there aren't frog legs or some horrible things happening to frogs in the background. A la the cats in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's kind of funny, just as an aside. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but it's really amusing when you notice for the first time in Monty Python and the Holy Grail that in practically every scene there's somebody beating the hell out of a cat or drowning a cat or somehow otherwise torturing a cat. It's actually slightly disturbing. But anyhow, I think the Arcaven illustrators all know what they have to do from now on. So anyhow, frog in a blender. Yeah. So, I mean, clearly Hammer must, with muscles like that, Hammer must be doing something to get the extra protein, right? Anyhow, I like competition. I like having an objective. And although I don't work with Ethan van Sciver, I am looking forward very much to competing with Ethan van Sciver. And at some point in time, perhaps we will work together. Dark Legion exists in order to allow us to publish other comics from other artists, other creators who want to get into our retail channel. And so that's what Dark Legion exists for. And in fact, today we actually had kind of a notable success. I'm going to segue here a bit. This is Chicago Typewriter. And Chicago Typewriter is our second Dark Legion Comics product. It's a graphic novel by Brandon Fiodino. And what we're excited about is the fact that Bounding Into Comics did a review of it and actually gave it the best review that any of our comics have received yet. We had gotten we'd gotten a 7, a 7.5, 2 8.5s, but this was our first 9 rating from Bounding into Comics, and so I was quite pleased by that. Brandon was quite pleased by that, and in fact, we've been talking about expanding the story, and Brandon is actually going to be working on some Chicago typewriter novels, stories set in that Chicago 1920s but Lovecraftian world with a dark fantasy spin to it. I'll show you a little bit of the artwork here. It's quite good. It's a little bit more the style that is, we're doing more of the sort of hot 90s sort of deeper style in terms of the art and the coloring. This is a little bit more of that flatter look that is popular today. But the story is good. The graphics are good. And the thing is, it's kind of unusual. And I think that those of you who pay attention to either science fiction, fantasy, or comics, there aren't that many people who can create new stuff, tell new stories, and create fairly interesting new worlds. And so that's something that Brandon has the ability to do, which is why we're so excited to continue working with him, and why we're pleased that people are responding positively to his work. Here's one more image of the artwork from it. So it's good stuff. And in fact, the really interesting thing about it is that it already got ripped off by a Korean entertainment group that actually created a TV show called Chicago Typewriter that is a ripoff of this, but went off in strange Korean directions that have literally nothing to do with anything. So it's going to be interesting to see where he takes it. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what he does with it. I'm kind of, living in Italy as I do, I'm kind of partial to the Chicago Italian flavor that it has to it. I'm pretty sure, based on Brandon's name, that's his background. And so the hero is a Italian American named Enzo, and he does a good job of capturing the flavor of that culture. And it's an interesting story, and I think it's going to be really fun to go along on the ride, see where he takes us. So, and we're looking forward to working with other creators. We're already working with Gary Kwapitz, who's doing his Rebel Dead Revenge with us. We've had a couple other submissions that were not up to the standard that we require. But we're just getting started. We are just dipping our toes in, and so it's going to be tremendously interesting to see what sort of infrastructure we're going to be able to build, because the world is changing. The comics industry is changing. A lot of people don't realize how much Comixology and comics on Kindle are going to shake up the comics world. There is a very big shakeup coming. I was reading today that 2.5% of the U.S. comic shops failed last year. Marvel and DC are collectively down unit-wise about 20% over the last 2 years. If this follows the example of some other industries where SJWs have gotten out of control, that is going to increase to 50% down in a relatively short period of time. And so there's going to be a double whammy as the comic shops fail. It reduces the sales for Marvel and DC, And that's why you're seeing DC try to push into Walmart and so forth. And so, these are very interesting times, and that's where new companies that are not tied to the old ways of doing things, who are not making the same mistakes that the industry leaders are making, this is when disruption occurs. This is the classic moment at which disruption occurs. And so I expect Ethan, because he had the courage to go out on his own, I expect that he is going to continue to become more influential and more significant in the industry. But that doesn't change my objectives in the slightest. It doesn't change my expectations in the slightest. We know what we're doing. And, once we announce the next 2 or 3 things that we're doing, it is going to have a serious impact on the industry. So, it's going to be an exciting time. I'm hoping that more of you are going to be interested in taking part in what we're doing and helping us do what we're doing. It's going to be an exciting time. There's an interesting comment here that I don't understand. I blame Gamergate. That seems to be the fashion these days. Even Rian Johnson is dropping on that excuse. Well, as you know, I am the leader of Gamergate. So how exactly are we to blame for whatever it is you're blaming? The Gamergate was very specifically about the lack of ethics in game journalism. And so, yes, it was a very effective group, but it's interesting to see that the same issues that launched Gamergate, that got taken off, that got out of control in the science fiction movement with the Hugo Award, the Sad Puppies and the Rabid Puppies, is now coming over into comics. And so, Comicsgate, as they're starting to call it now, is going to be more significant than either its critics or its supporters understand. There's an interesting comment here. Comics are a weird hill to die on after the largest migration in human history. Well, first of all, we're not dying on any hills. Secondly, comics are only one thing that we're doing. Third, comics are culture. Culture comes before politics. If you want to affect the root causes of the largest migration in human history, then you have to start addressing the culture. I can't do anything about the fact that there are over 100 million people in the United States who don't belong there. That's for Donald Trump. I can't do anything about Merkel, and I can't do anything about about the ships crossing the Mediterranean. Matteo Salvini seems to be doing a pretty effective job about that. Now, maybe I can do a little bit more than most. Tomorrow I'm going to be on. Tomorrow I'm going to be on Chinese television, talking about some of the military stuff going on with NATO and so forth. All right, so yeah, because of my political background, I occasionally have an audience that maybe your average comic book editor doesn't have. But I am a very minor and trivial voice. I mean, look at the number of viewers. We have 103 viewers on YouTube. I have less than 5,000 subscribers. I think Ethan is pushing 70,000, right? So what any one person can do is very limited. But what we can do is we can each strike our little blow in the culture war. And maybe that's in comics. Maybe that's in science fiction. Maybe that's in archery. Maybe that's at your local university or your bowling club. All of these things matter. All of these things are significant. And so the key thing is to do what you can. You know, I had people asking me to do something in comics for 3 years before I did, because I didn't believe that I had anything to offer, because I didn't believe that there was anything I could do about it. I can't draw. But what do you know, lo and behold, what do you know? Suddenly it turns out that, hey, maybe I can do something. And that is true for each and every one of you. Each and every one of you is capable of doing more than you think. And so, now some of you may not have understood when Gamergate was mentioned, and I said, I'm the leader of Gamergate. That's a Gamergate joke. You know, in Gamergate, we quickly realized that the media was desperate to create a leader so that they could destroy that individual. You know, they're trying to claim that Milo was the leader, or Cernovich was the leader. It was kind of funny because neither of those guys were even Gamergate. Milo kind of was by the end. But the point is, the saying got started, I'm the leader of Gamergate, and so can you. And, that is the attitude to adapt. Now, we can only do so much by ourselves. I didn't draw Chicago Typewriter. I didn't even send the review copy to Bounding Into Comics. I have no idea how they got their review copy. I have no idea how they decided to review it, but I'm glad they did. Bounding Into Comics started not all that long ago, I don't believe, and yet they're already doing a better job of covering the comics industry than most of the SJW comic sites. And so, John Trent and the guys over there are making a difference in their industry of choice. You can do the same thing. We have 20-something bloggers at Castelia House, just volunteer bloggers, doing their thing. I don't even know who half of them are. All we did was we set the site up, we set the blog up, and said, here, those of you who are interested in writing about these topics, go ahead and do it. And nearly 30 people responded. I think 20-something of them are still posting regularly. And the site has continually grown ever since it started. What people like Ethan, what people like the Diversity in Comics guy, what people like Brandon Fiadino, what the guys at Arkhaven and the guys at Dark Legion are doing is they are making a difference by striking their blow in the culture war. And so, if you can't do something, then support somebody who can. Don't run around, tearing people down. Go around building people up. You know, maybe you know somebody who knows somebody who designs role-playing games. Like somebody just said here, any plans for a Quantum Mortis role-playing game? The Mass Effect base needs a new home. There's no plans for it right now, but that's certainly something that would be possible. We're working on some other stuff with Quantum Mortis right now. The War Dogs Inc. Line just acquired a new volunteer who's going to help us continue to develop that. Once we get the role-playing game done for Alt Hero, perhaps we'll do one for Quantum Mortis. We'll be doing more stuff on the game front as well. But one step at a time. We're a relatively small group. We can only do so much. I would like to see some of the 70,000 people that are subscribing to Ethan's channel to start doing what a lot of the people who subscribe to this channel are doing, which is taking a step, taking a risk, striking a blow. And so that's what I encourage all of you to do. And a lot of you, I know, are doing it already. Voxiversity gets great support. Castelia House gets great support. Archaven is growing substantially. And so, like for example, here's something you can do. Go to my blog and look up the 2018 Dragon Awards. My recommendations for the Dragon Awards are there. Go and vote on the Dragon Awards. Imagine how significant it would be if Alt Hero won the Dragon Award for Best Comic. That would be a big deal. And so, and plus, I would very much like to see John C. Wright win Best Science Fiction Novel for Superluminary, for the plain and simple reason that Superluminary is the best science fiction novel published in at least the last 10 years and possibly a lot more. So, there is something that everyone can do. There is something that everybody can do. And so, why Hearthstone? Because Hearthstone's the best mobile game that I've played lately. Is Smog up for anything this year? These are just the nominations. So, yes, Blizzard is converged pretty badly, but badly converged in the game industry means that you're less converged than everybody in the comics industry. So, but even the creation of the Dragon Awards is an example of the stuff that we're talking about. Photonia, stop going on about with your own advertising Bitcoin thing, okay? Just drop it. And so, the important thing to do is to focus on every day trying to do something. Something that Mike Cernovich told me once that I thought was very useful is he said every day he tries to help somebody. He tries to help somebody do something somewhere, and that is what makes a difference. So, if you take one thing away from this Darkstream, that should be it. Have a good evening. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. And make sure that you let Ethan know I'm still coming for him. Have a good evening.